The rejection, the autumn rain hammered against the glass doors of the Grandview Hotel like nature's own percussion section. Emma Sterling straightened her navy blazer and smoothed back her auburn hair, checking her reflection in the polished marble of the reception desk. After 6 years climbing from housekeeping to hotel manager, she'd learned that appearances mattered almost as much as service in the luxury hospitality business. The Grandview wasn't just any hotel. It was the crown jewel of the city's downtown district, where senators dined with oil executives and foreign diplomats sealed million-dollar deals over champagne. Every guest who walked through those doors carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from never having to check their bank balance. That's why the man who stumbled through the entrance at precisely 9:47 p.m. looked so jarringly out of place. Water dripped from his unkempt brown hair onto the Italian marble floors Emma kept spotless. His clothes, a faded flannel shirt, torn jeans, and boots that had seen better decades, belonged in a homeless shelter, not the Grandview's pristine lobby. The smell of rain and something else, something unwashed, followed him like an unwelcome shadow. Emma's trained eye quickly assessed the situation. Tom Rodriguez, the night security guard, had already noticed the intruder and was moving discreetly toward the front desk, his hand resting casually near his radio. The few guests scattered throughout the lobby, a pharmaceutical heiress, a tech mogul, and a federal judge, were beginning to stare with undisguised distaste. "Excuse me, sir," Emma called out, her voice carrying the polished authority she'd perfected over years of managing difficult situations. She stepped from behind the desk, intercepting the man before he could venture deeper into the lobby. "I'm afraid you may be in the wrong place." The stranger stopped, water still pooling at his feet. When he looked up, Emma was startled by his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to catalogue every detail of her face with unsettling intensity. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something about his posture, the way he held himself, that didn't quite match the homeless vagrant she'd initially assumed him to be. "I need a room," he said simply. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with an educated cadence that caught her off guard. Emma glanced toward Tom, who had positioned himself within earshot, but maintained his distance. "Sir, our rooms start at $400 per night, and we require a valid credit card and identification for registration. That won't be a problem." The man reached into his back pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a soggy wallet. "I have both." The pharmaceutical heiress audibly gasped as the stranger dripped muddy water onto the Persian rug that had cost more than most people's annual salary. Emma felt the weight of expectation from the other guests, all of whom clearly expected her to handle this situation with swift efficiency. "I understand," Emma said, her voice taking on the diplomatic tone she used when delivering unwelcome news to VIP clients. "However, I'm concerned about the comfort of our other guests. Perhaps I could recommend some excellent accommodations that might be more suitable to your current circumstances." She pulled out a business card for a modest but clean Hotel 6, 8 blocks away, where the rooms cost $60 a night, and the staff wouldn't blink at a guest who looked like he'd been sleeping rough. The man stared at the card for a long moment, then looked back at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're refusing me service." It wasn't a question, but Emma felt compelled to explain. "Sir, the Grandview maintains certain standards for the comfort and safety of all our guests. I'm sure you understand that we have policies." Policies. The word came out flat, final. The stranger tucked the business card into his shirt pocket without looking at it. "I see." Something in his tone made Emma suddenly uncomfortable. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. No anger, no argument, no demands to speak to a manager. Just a quiet acceptance that felt somehow more unsettling than any confrontation would have been. Tom stepped forward, his professional smile not quite masking the warning in his voice. "Sir, if you'd like, I'd be happy to call you a cab to help you find more appropriate accommodations." The stranger's gaze moved between Emma and Tom, then swept across the lobby, where the other guests had stopped pretending not to stare. Finally, he nodded once. "That won't be necessary." He turned back to Emma, and for a split second she could have sworn she saw something like disappointment in those blue eyes. "Thank you for your honesty." Without another word, he walked back toward the entrance, leaving a trail of water, droplets that would require immediate attention from housekeeping. Emma watched through the glass doors as he disappeared into the rain-soaked night, swallowed by the storm as completely as if he'd never existed. The lobby's tension immediately evaporated. The pharmaceutical heiress resumed her phone conversation. The tech mogul returned to his laptop, and the federal judge went back to his evening newspaper. Tom gave Emma an approving nod before returning to his post. Yet as Emma called housekeeping to clean the floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. The stranger's final words echoed in her mind. Not what he'd said, but how he'd said it, as if he'd been testing something and found the results exactly as disappointing as he'd expected. She pushed the thought away and returned to her duties. The Grandview Hotel had standards to maintain, and she'd done exactly what any responsible manager would do. She'd protected her establishment's reputation and ensured the comfort of valued guests. So why did victory feel so much like defeat? The purchase Emma arrived at work the next morning to find the Grandview Hotel in chaos. Victoria Chen, a sharp-dressed woman with silver hair and calculating eyes, stood in the center of the lobby surrounded by men in expensive suits, all carrying leather briefcases and speaking in urgent whispers. James Wellington, the hotel's owner and Emma's boss, looked pale as he hurried between groups, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. "Emma!" James called out the moment he spotted her. "Conference room now, we have a situation." She followed him through the maze of suited figures, her stomach knotting with each step. In her 6 years at the Grandview, she'd never seen James this rattled. He was the kind of man who handled celebrity meltdowns and diplomatic incidents with the same calm efficiency most people reserve for ordering coffee. The conference room buzzed with tension. Victoria Chen sat at the head of the table like a general surveying a battlefield, her tablet displaying what appeared to be legal documents. The other men, lawyers, Emma realized, flanked her with military precision. "Miss Sterling," Victoria said without looking up from her screen. "Please sit down." Emma took the chair James indicated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's going on?" James cleared his throat, his face grim. "Emma, I need you to think very carefully about last night. Did anything unusual happen? Any incidents with guests or anyone else?" The memory hit her like cold water. The stranger in the rain, his torn clothes, those unsettling blue eyes, the way he'd said, "I see," when she'd refused him service. "There was a man," she said slowly. "He came in around 9:47 p.m., looked homeless, was soaking wet. I recommended he try the Bradford Inn instead." Victoria's fingers stopped moving across her tablet screen. She looked up for the first time, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Describe him." "Brown hair, unkempt, blue eyes, maybe 6'2", wearing old clothes, boots that had seen better days. He smelled like he'd been sleeping rough." Emma paused, remembering details that had seemed insignificant at the time. But his voice was educated, and there was something about the way he carried himself. "Marcus Blackwood," Victoria said, and the name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Emma had heard that name before. Everyone in the hospitality industry had. Marcus Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire who'd inherited one of the largest hotel empires in the world after his father's death 2 years ago. He owned properties on every continent, casinos in Monte Carlo, resorts in the Maldives, and luxury chains that catered to heads of state. "That's impossible," Emma breathed. "Marcus Blackwood wouldn't what?" Victoria's smile was predatory. "Wouldn't test the character of an establishment before deciding whether to acquire it? Wouldn't want to see how his potential employees treat people they perceive as beneath them?" The room spun around Emma. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what she was hearing. "Acquire it?" James pulled out a thick folder of documents. "As of 6 a.m. this morning, Marcus Blackwood owns the Grandview Hotel. He purchased it through a shell company overnight, paid cash, above asking price. No negotiation, no inspection, no due diligence. Just a simple transaction that makes him our new owner." Emma stared at the papers as if they might spontaneously combust. "Because I refused him service." "Because you proved his point about human nature," Victoria corrected. "Mr. Blackwood has some very specific ideas about how people reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching. You, Miss Sterling, provided him with exactly the demonstration he expected." The weight of her mistake settled on Emma's shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd not only insulted a guest, she'd insulted the man who now controlled her livelihood and the livelihoods of everyone she worked with. "I was protecting the hotel's reputation," she said weakly. "Your other guests," Victoria interrupted, "are now his guests. And he's very interested in understanding why their comfort mattered more than basic human decency." James leaned forward, his expression a mixture of sympathy and desperation. "Emma, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. Marcus Blackwood doesn't just buy hotels, he transforms them. Sometimes that transformation includes keeping existing staff. Sometimes it doesn't." Through the conference room windows, Emma could see the hotel's morning bustle continuing as normal. Housekeeping staff prepared rooms, restaurant workers set up for breakfast, and the concierge team assisted guests with their day's plans. None of them knew that their world had shifted overnight, that their futures now rested in the hands of a man who tested their manager and found her wanting. "Where is he now?" Emma asked. Victoria consulted her tablet. "Penthouse suite. He's been there since approximately midnight, reviewing personnel files and operational reports. He's particularly interested in staff interactions with challenging and guests." The implication was clear. Marcus Blackwood was conducting his own audit, and Emma was likely at the top of his list for review. "He wants to see you," Victoria continued. "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. I suggest you use the time between now and then to think very carefully about how you plan to explain your actions." Emma stood on unsteady legs. What kind of man conducts business like this? For the first time, Victoria's expression softened slightly. The kind of man whose father taught him that people show their true faces only when they think it doesn't matter. The kind of man who's been disappointed by human nature so many times that he's stopped expecting anything better. As Emma left the conference room, her mind raced with possibilities. She could apologize, explain her position, hope that Marcus Blackwood was reasonable enough to understand that she'd been doing her job, or she could prepare for the very real possibility that by evening she'd be clearing out her desk and looking for new employment. Either way, she had 4 hours to prepare for a conversation that would determine not just her future, but her understanding of what it truly meant to serve others with dignity and respect. The storm from the night before had passed, but Emma could feel another, one building on the horizon. Part 3. The confrontation at exactly 2 o'clock. Emma stood outside the penthouse suite's mahogany doors, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She'd spent the morning researching Marcus Blackwood, trying to understand the man behind the empire. The internet revealed precious little, A few business articles, some grainy photos from charity events, and speculation about why the heir to the Blackwood fortune had become such a recluse after his father's death. Diana Foster, the hotel's head of HR, had briefed her on protocol. Be respectful but not obsequious. Answer his questions directly. Don't make excuses, but don't grovel either. Men like Marcus Blackwood respect honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Emma knocked twice, her knuckles barely making a sound against the solid wood. Enter. The penthouse suite was a study in understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while leather furniture and modern art created an atmosphere of power tempered by taste. Marcus Blackwood sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Emma's annual salary, but he'd abandoned the ragged clothes from the night before in favor of a charcoal suit that transformed him into someone she barely recognized. Clean-shaven. Now, with his dark hair properly styled, he looked every inch the billionaire CEO. Only his eyes remained the same, those piercing blue orbs that seemed to catalogue every detail of her appearance and demeanor. "Miss Sterling," he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit." Emma lowered herself into the leather chair, acutely aware that this conversation would determine her future. "Mr. Blackwood, I owe you an apology for last night." "Duh. You?" He leaned back, studying her with the same unsettling intensity she remembered from their first encounter. "Tell me, what exactly are you apologizing for?" The question caught her off guard. For refusing you service, for not recognizing who you were." "Ah." Marcus picked up a silver pen and rolled it between his fingers. "So you're sorry you didn't know I was wealthy, not that you treated a human being like he was worthless." Heat flooded Emma's cheeks. "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" He opened a folder on his desk. "I've been reviewing your employee record, Miss Sterling. 6 years with the Grandview, promoted from housekeeping to management, exemplary performance reviews, commendations for customer service, 0 complaints. From guests, by all accounts, you're exactly the kind of employee any hotel would want." Emma waited for the other shoe to drop. "Which makes last night even more interesting," Marcus continued, "because you didn't refuse me service out of malice or prejudice. You refused me service because you genuinely believed you were protecting your establishment and its other guests. In your mind, you were doing your job." "I was doing my job," Emma said, finding her voice. "The Grandview serves a very specific clientele. We have standards." "Standards." Marcus set down the pen and leaned forward. "Tell me about these standards, Miss Sterling. Do they include treating people like garbage because they don't meet your visual expectations?" Robert Kane, a board member, Emma recognized from corporate meetings, spoke from his position near the windows. "Marcus, perhaps we should focus on operational matters rather than—" The understanding. 2 weeks later, Emma found herself in the most surreal situation of her career, teaching a billionaire how to change bedsheets. Marcus Blackwood, heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, stood in room 412, struggling with fitted corners, while she demonstrated proper hospital corners with the kind of patience usually reserved for training new housekeeping staff. "The secret is tucking the excess fabric under the mattress at a 45-degree angle," Emma explained, watching Marcus fumble with the Egyptian cotton. "Too loose, and it comes undone during the night. Too tight, and it tears." Marcus managed to get 3 corners properly secured before the 4th popped loose. "How do Maria and the other housekeepers make this look effortless?" 20 years of practice," Emma said, smoothly fixing his mistake. "Maria started here when she was 19. She's put her 3 kids through college on housekeeping wages and overtime." It had been Marcus's idea to spend time working alongside every department in the hotel. "I can't improve what I don't understand," he told her that first day, "and I can't understand it from a boardroom or a spreadsheet. So far, he'd worked in the kitchen, learning that the prep cooks arrived at 4 a.m. to ensure fresh bread for breakfast service. He'd shadowed the maintenance crew and discovered that Tom Rodriguez had been fixing broken elevator buttons with his own tools because the repair budget had been cut 3 times in the past year. He'd even spent an evening with the night audit team, processing the endless stream of small emergencies that kept a luxury hotel running smoothly. Emma had to admit, grudgingly, that Marcus approached each task with genuine curiosity rather than the patronizing attitude she'd expected from someone of his wealth and status. "Tell me about your sister," Marcus said as they moved to the bathroom, where he would learn the precise arrangement of towels and amenities that guests expected. The question surprised her. "Grace? How do you know about Grace?" "You mentioned her when Diana was updating employee emergency contact information. She's in medical school." Emma nodded, focusing on demonstrating the proper way to fold washcloths into perfect rectangles. "Johns Hopkins, 3rd year. She's going to be a pediatric surgeon." "That's expensive. Very expensive." Emma glanced at him, wondering where this conversation was leading. "I help with tuition when I can." Marcus was quiet as he attempted to replicate her towel-folding technique. His hands, she noticed, bore calluses she hadn't expected from a billionaire, evidence of some kind of manual work that didn't match his corporate image. "Is that why you've never pursued management positions at other hotels? The stability here helps you support her education." Emma's hands stilled on the towels. "How do you know I've had other offers?" "I make it my business to understand the people who work for me," Marcus said simply. "The Ritz-Carlton offered you an assistant manager position 2 years ago. The Four Seasons wanted you for their new property last spring. You turned them both down despite salary increases that would have been substantial." She had no idea how he'd discovered those offers, but his accuracy was unsettling. Grace needed consistency. If I'd taken a new position, it would have meant relocating or working different hours. She was struggling with organic chemistry, needed tutoring I could only afford because of the overtime I earned here. Marcus successfully folded a washcloth and held it up for her approval. At her nod, he set it with the others and reached for a hand towel. "My father would have said you made a poor business decision," he said quietly. "Philip Blackwood believed that family obligations made you weak, that successful people prioritize their own advancement above everything else." Something in his tone made Emma study his profile. "What do you believe?" Marcus was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "I believe my father was brilliant at building empires and terrible at building relationships. He taught me to see people as assets or liabilities, resources to be maximized, or obstacles to be removed. It took me 32 years to realize that approach had cost me everything that actually mattered." Emma waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "I had a younger brother," Marcus continued, his hands moving automatically through the towel-folding routine. "Nathan. He was everything I wasn't. Warm, generous, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and called just to check on you. He wanted to use the family money for charitable foundations, homeless shelters, programs that actually helped people." Emma's chest tightened at his use of past tense. "My father saw Nathan's compassion as weakness. He spent years trying to toughen him up, to teach him that sentiment had no place in business. The more pressure he applied, the more Nathan retreated. Eventually, Nathan stopped coming to family gatherings, stopped taking our calls. He said being around us made him feel like he was suffocating." Marcus set down the towel he'd been folding and moved to the window. "He died in a car accident 3 years ago. We hadn't spoken in 18 months because I'd sided with my father in some argument about fiscal responsibility versus bleeding heart liberalism. The last conversation I had with my brother was an argument about whether helping homeless veterans was a worthwhile investment. Understanding hit Emma like a wave. The stranger who'd appeared in their lobby that night hadn't just been testing her character. He'd been searching for proof that Nathan's faith in human kindness hadn't been naive idealism. "He would have helped you," she said quietly. "What? Your brother? If he'd been working the front desk that night, he would have found a way to help you. He wouldn't have seen a problem to be managed. He would have seen a person who needed assistance." Marcus nodded, his reflection in the window showing a vulnerability she'd never glimpsed before. "Nathan would have offered you his umbrella and insisted on walking you to a shelter himself. He would have made sure you had a hot meal and clean clothes, probably would have checked on you the next day to make sure you were okay." They stood in silence, the weight of loss and regret settling between them like a third presence in the room. "Is that why you're changing how the hotel operates?" Emma asked. "To honor his memory?" Marcus turned away from the window. "I'm changing it because he was right, and my father was wrong, and it took losing him to figure that out. Every time I see someone in need and my first instinct is to calculate profit margins instead of offering help, I hear my father's voice. And every time I fight that instinct and choose compassion instead, I hear Nathan's." Emma understood now why Marcus had spent 2 weeks working alongside housekeepers and maintenance staff, why he'd insisted on learning every job from the ground up. He wasn't just transforming the hotel, he was transforming himself, trying to become the man his brother had seen potential for him to be. "He would be proud of what you're doing," Emma said. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. "I hope so, because this is just the beginning." Part 5. The Resolution. 6 months later, Emma stood in the Grandview's renovated lobby, watching Marcus address the assembled staff for their monthly meeting. The space looked the same: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, leather furniture that spoke of quiet luxury, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. Where once the lobby had felt like a fortress designed to keep certain people out, it now felt like a sanctuary designed to welcome everyone in. The change wasn't visible in the decor, but in the way staff moved through the space, the way they interacted with guests, the way they carried themselves with dignity and purpose. "Our occupancy rate is up 12% from last year," Marcus was saying, "but more importantly, our guest satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs. When people feel genuinely welcomed, when they experience authentic hospitality rather than mere service, they return. They recommend us to others. They become part of our community." Emma smiled as she watched Maria, the longtime housekeeper, nod approvingly. Maria had been skeptical of the changes at first. Too many promises from management over the years had been broken. But when Marcus had personally approved her request for new equipment and increased the housekeeping budget by 30%, she'd begun to believe that this time might be different. Tom Rodriguez, now head of security with 2 additional staff members under his supervision, caught Emma's eye and grinned. The security team's role had evolved from keeping people out to helping people feel safe and welcomed. Tom's new business cards read Guest Experience Coordinator, a title that better reflected his actual responsibilities. "We've also launched our community outreach program," Marcus continued. "Every month, we'll host dinner service for local homeless shelters, provide job training workshops, and offer temporary accommodation for people transitioning back into housing. This isn't charity. It's recognition that hospitality means something more than just serving people who can already afford luxury." The applause was genuine, enthusiastic. Emma had watched the staff's initial confusion give way to pride as they began to understand that their work had expanded beyond serving the wealthy to actually making a difference in their community. After the meeting, Marcus found Emma in her Office, the same space, but now equipped with the resources she needed to truly support both her staff and her guests.